Ned, let me start with you. Pretty swift action. President Trump, we know from his prior life as a businessman, a TV show person, and during the campaign, he makes these decisions fairly quickly, and this one weighed on him. You could see him grappling with it earlier in the day, but ultimately he probably felt he was doing what was right for the American people, and in his words, also the optics of it.
Well, as well he should, Charles. I mean, he ran on draining the swamp. This was not to be business as usual. This was not to be status quo. I mean, this kind of behavior has taken place in previous administrations, both Republican and Democrat, but it is not to be this way with this administration. And the thing that I would say to President Trump is, with Price's resignation, again, Price was a symptom of the disease. The actual disease needs to be dealt with, and he can deal with that with an executive order. He can deal with it and say, I do not want to see this behavior moving forward in the executive branch with my cabinet members. You will use taxpayer dollars and government resources responsibly. Government service is about being a servant, not living the lifestyle of the rich and famous on the taxpayer dollar. So I was very happy to see this take place. And again, I assume, Charles, this was resign or be fired. And I'm very happy to see Trump move swiftly on this because we want to be talking about other things. We want to be talking about tax reform and the plan that Trump has, not about egregious behavior like this.
Kevin, of course, many folks pointing out that this is not new. Ned talking about this being a symptom of the disease. That disease ran rampant during the Obama years where the use of private jets was sort of the modus operandi, business as usual. So message maybe for everyone in Washington, D.C., the so-called swamp, let's cut it out?
Absolutely, Charles, and I couldn't agree with Ned more. I mean, this is a symptom of this swamp. Previous administrations, both Republican and Democrat, have this in their past. I think it's important for this president to make it clear that this is not the status quo. He ran on a campaign to rid Washington of this. It's very sad that in these last 8 months we've seen not just one, not just two, but multiple cabinet members using this privilege. We saw the Department of the Interior Secretary using private jets that are paid for by big oil. We saw Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, wanting private jets for his honeymoon. This president needs to clamp down on this and put a stop to it.
Well, you know, Deroy, he obviously he's moving swiftly on this. It didn't linger, and it won't be the major news come Monday morning, but it is big news right now. And let's talk about another perhaps elephant in the room. Tom Price was brought on board to shepherd through the repeal and replacement effort for Obamacare. We kept hearing during his nomination process that, hey, when this guy is in, he's the architect. He's already written these plans. He knows what to do. In fact, he's going to give us 3 of them with bows on them. We'll just pick one. Well, they picked a few. None have worked. And I didn't see him around a lot when it was time to sell this thing. Maybe he was on a private jet somewhere, being a little facetious there. But seriously,
flying all over.
There could be something to that as well.
I think if the Graham Cassidy bill had gone through and we're on President Trump's desk tonight, I imagine Tom Price would still be around. I think part of that.
But he would have had to pay more than $50,000.
He might have had to pay something like that, but it might have been, well, all right, you know, you've took some flights you shouldn't have, but at least we got the health care bill through. There is no health care bill. You've got this huge distraction, which I'm sure the press would love to keep as a scandal for another week or 2 or 3 or 5 if they could. And it's unfortunate because Tom Price is a very committed free market conservative. He is a physician, an actual doctor, and he's also is the chairman of the House Budget Committee. So there's somebody who actually understood fiscal matters, medical matters, and so on. And it's unusual to have that combination of talents. It's really a sad and a shame that this happened and he had to go.
He had the ideal resume, as he himself pointed out in his resignation letter, 40 years of service. But ultimately, Ned, will this make it harder now? President Trump has been saying in the last couple of days, if it were not for this Friday deadline, Graham Cassidy would have gone through. Now will this make it harder to push through that repeal and replace effort once the time comes back around?
You know, your bet is as good as mine, Charles, right now. I have very little faith in the Republican majority in the Senate to actually be able to even walk and chew gum at the same time. So is it going to make it harder? I'm not sure that you could have added and made it any harder than it already is. You know, my hope is that we will come back to this, get tax reform done in some form or fashion, and maybe come back to health care in January or February. But I don't really think that Tom Price's resignation or, you know, I would say lack of effort on this really did anything. It was a lack of leadership in the Senate that really brought about the end of the Graham Cassidy bill.
Let me ask you real quick, Deroy. You know, we're lauding Tom Price because he's had an exemplary career. But to Ned's point, was this symptomatic of a disease that's easy to catch once you arrive in Washington, D.C.? And does this underscore just how difficult it will be to drain the swamp when a lot of the drainers get there and they actually say, hey, this ain't too bad?
Yeah, it's a swamp when you arrive, and pretty soon it turns into a hot tub. And I guess the flights and the ease of travel and so on become something to which people become comfortable. Unfortunately, I agree with what Ned said, that the failure of Graham Cassidy this week was not a failure of Tom Price. I think it was a failure of Mitch McConnell. The worst thing these guys did was take August off, run to the beach for 5 weeks. They should have been there every single day, voting and voting and voting and voting and voting until something got 51 votes. Shame on them for not doing their jobs and taking off and playing beach volleyball, whatever it is that they did, rather than focusing on this. I think if they'd done that, you probably would have got something onto the president's desk probably about Labor Day.
Kevin, in the meantime, we've got tax reform. President Trump this week making some overtures toward the Democrats there. We will circle back to some form of replacement for Obamacare, which, by the way, Democrats admit needs some working on. So do they take this, the news tonight, this major breaking news, and make a mountain out of this molehill, so to speak? Or do they get back and focus on the task at hand, which is governing and trying to get something done for the American public?
Listen, I think, Charles, it's a sad state of affairs with this Tom Price episode. You know, he'd been in Washington for decades. This isn't something that he just learned in the last 8 months, but it's indicative of an administration that plays fast and loose with regulatory laws. Now, I'm hopeful. You've got some good indications that Lamar Alexander from Tennessee, Republican, and Patty Murray from Washington State, a Democrat, are working together to address some of the concerns with Obamacare as it moves forward. So I think you're going to see some energy now because Republicans, as Ned rightly pointed out, have failed miserably in recent iterations to repeal and replace Obamacare. So you're going to have Democrats stepping up to the plate to make the law stronger. It's the law of the land. We're not going to see any movement on that before the end of the year. Right. And hopefully they'll run on something like that in the midterms, and we'll gladly run on these folks taking away their health care across the districts. There's one thing that the Secretary
can do. There are a lot of things that can be done independently by the Secretary of HHS. And part of the absence of not having that seat full right now means that many of those things may not be done. But a lot of things can be done on a regulatory basis, and I hope that the temporary secretary does a lot of those things.
Real quick, Ned.
But, Charles, last thing, if I could say this. I think even though this is sad to see Tom Price's behavior, at least it showed that Republicans police their own.
Absolutely correct.
Contrast that with the corruption trial of Senator Bob Menendez, sitting up in New Jersey, still in office, with Democrat leadership refusing to ask him to step down.
Realistically, guys, Kevin, the bottom line, Kevin, is that President Trump moved swiftly to address this, and this was a major move. One of his key members of his cabinet is out, and he's out over something. He's out over something that was business as usual, but no more.